Well, hello everybody. We are live from Angular Birmingham meetup. Just want to say a big thank you to Thomas and Oye for joining us tonight, and to the guys in the audience. Hey, cool.
Hey, folk.
Hello, hello. So this is the first time we're trying this, so we might have a bit of technical issues. So if we do have, just sorry, we'll try and fix as we go along. Hopefully it's gonna go smooth. So now over to you guys to introduce yourself quickly, and then we'll start with the what's new in Angular 14.
So, hey, folks, my name is Tomas Trajan, Google developer expert for Angular. Happy to present for you today what's new in Angular 14 and looking forward to then other talks about what's upcoming in Angular 15 and anything else we have prepared. And then, yeah, please, like I will then just introduce myself as a part of the talk. So then later.
Oh, thank you very much. Hey everyone, my name is Uyimadi and I'm a software architect, and I'm here to just give you guys a sneak peek into some of the great things we have coming in store in London. So yeah, hope you guys enjoy yourselves and have a great time.
Cool. All right then. Thanks again for joining us. Over to you again, Thomas, and let's go and see what's new in Angular 14. The cool features.
All right. So yeah, very happy to be here tonight with you, and like we will have this overview, and hopefully we can learn something and get you excited for what is already there, use it, and then even more excited about what is coming and get used that too. So first thing, we are going to talk about what's new in Angular 14. So as I said, my name is Tomas Trajan. I work as a consultant with mostly Swiss enterprises because I'm based in Switzerland. Google developer expert for Angular and web technologies, doing consulting, workshops, writing blogs about Angular, speaking at the meetups, conferences, stuff like that. So before Corona, even international speaker, now it's slowly coming back, and then workshops with focus on Angular, RxJS, and GRX. So if you could use some support, do not hesitate to ping me. Besides that, if you are, of course, interested in Angular because you are at the Angular meetup Birmingham, you might be interested in like articles. So you can check out my Angular blog at thomastrand.medium.com with many interesting articles for beginners and advanced people. So you might find a lot of cool value. And if you are writing blogs yourself, you might check Medium Enhanced Stats, which basically give you this total overview, which is missing in the Medium by default. So it's a Chrome extension I wrote to give you this kind of overview. And now with my good friend and colleague, another Google developer expert for Angular, Kevin Kreutzer, we created a new site called AngularExperts.io. And then we will have a new blog with free articles. So please check it out, subscribe to get the updates. Kevin actually published new article just today about the new Angular router with standalone APIs. So that can be something which is very interesting and new. Right. So there will be probably links shared after the event, so feel free to then check it out later. And if you are just starting with Angular, you might be interested in Angular NGRX Material Starter on GitHub, open source project, which shows you how to use Angular Material, how to use animations, theming, NGRX-based state management. It has over 2,700 stars, so it's pretty popular with the folks out there. So it can help you get started if you are just starting out. And if you are working in some larger organization and you might work with multiple applications and you even want to extract some of the functionality in the Angular elements or other web components, you might be interested in Angular extension elements, which is a library which helps you to lazy load Angular elements and other web components, also written by me. All right. So, but now I don't know how it will work, but we can try. So like, we are back after, well, I actually hidden this slide. I don't know why it's here. Doesn't really matter. But what I wanted to do is that you can tell me about yourself. So please raise your hand if you are working with Angular in your day-to-day job. Anybody? Does somebody? Hello? Do we have a technical problem? Looks a little bit stuck.
Can you hear?
Yes. So could
Yeah.
you hear me?
Yeah, most of us here were working with Angular day to day.
Okay. So perfect. Anyway, So, and that did anybody of you already migrated to Angular 14 at least one of your applications? Oh, right. So Sam, so probably like the video was stuck for a second, but now it's working perfectly. So great. Cool. So then most of you haven't migrated yet. So that means it might be interesting for you to learn something more about it. So let's talk about Angular 14, the best release in a long time. And why is it so? So Angular 14 was released on the 2nd of June, so it's already a couple of months. And it was the first release since the removal of Vue engine in Angular 13. So that means that now the Ivy migration is completed, and this unlocks new evolution and new features for Angular so that Angular team can actually focus on new features. So let's unpack this, what this means. So probably you are aware that Angular behind the scenes, basically when we write those templates, those templates are compiled into some instructions which run in the background, which then update our live template with like the data bindings and stuff like that, right? And then basically from Angular version 2 until version 12, we have been using something called Vue Engine. Besides that, from version 8, we could opt in into new renderer called Ivy, and then from the version 9, it was the default, while we could still disable it and fall back to Vue Engine. And that was all the way until version 13, which is the first version which was Ivy only. That means that this older rendering engine called Vue Engine was completely removed. And this was one of those things which you, if you really like take a step back and zoom out, if you look at it, you can think about it in such a way that we had like AngularJS, and then we had like Angular 2, which is like with the Vue engine, and that was from version 2 to 12. And now, even though it's like Angular 13, if you think about it, it's almost as if it was Angular 3, because it's like a new rendering engine. And of course, this is just like metaphorically speaking, and of course it was not as breaking as from AngularJS to Angular 2, of course, but there is like some truth to this statement, right? But the important thing is that this is now finished. So it was finished in the version 13, and this actually consumed a lot of effort on the side of the Angular team. And because this is now finished, now they finally could spend this whole 6 months for the next major release of Angular 14, focusing on new features and improvements for us developers, and because of that also for the improvements for our users, who will benefit from our ability to deliver even better applications. So that's like a little behind the scenes info, or like a background info, like why this happened now and why is it important, and what we can expect in the future because of it. All right. So one of the first features which have landed in Angular 14, and in my personal opinion, the most important feature which landed in Angular 14 is properly typed reactive forms. So let's see what that means. So there was a long-standing GitHub issue on the Angular repo, which was opened already in the December 2016, where people have been asking for a fully typed reactive forms. Because if you think about it, one of the key benefits of using Angular, and Angular basically pioneered using of the TypeScript in a front end. So at the time when the Angular came up, like with the TypeScript and previously AdScript, but then luckily it was the TypeScript, most other frameworks and libraries were like, no, JavaScript all the way, this is not necessary, this is like not a good developer experience, we want to do what we want all the time, and this kind of stuff. And now, of course, like a couple of years, like 5 years later, it's totally a no-brainer, and every single framework and library, when you now get started with them, like they provide you a way to start with TypeScript, which is usually the default one, right? So TypeScript plays like a very major role in the story of the Angular, and therefore it was a bit strange that if Angular is TypeScript first and has everything perfectly typed, then this one of the major features of Angular, which is the reactive forms, was not typed. So you didn't get any kind of type safety. You did not, the compiler would not catch it if you are trying to set like a property which does not exist on a form and stuff like that, right? So there were some ways around that. You could create some kind of like dedicated builders and factories for your forms, which would enforce this kind of typing on one level up. but this was really not convenient and many people didn't do it. So therefore, it is very important that now this first class support for the proper typing of the reactive forms come in the Angular. So it's a very huge update. And another great thing about it is that the Angular CLI has our back again. So basically, when we are upgrading from Angular 13 to Angular 14 by running ng update at angular/cli at angular/core, the update process will run automatic transformation schematics, which are going to migrate all your types and interfaces which you are using from the reactive forms module of the Angular to something called like untyped. So it will be like every single of those interfaces like form group, form array, form control will be automatically migrated to untyped form group, form control. Are we all right? Alex, everything all right? Okay. So yeah, so there will be like automatic migration. And so we will see very shortly how that looks like. Okay, so this seems to be slightly broken when used like this, unfortunately. This would have been an animation which would have shown you the
I think you have
reactive
to share
form.
the screen. I think
Yeah,
if you share the
like
screen, maybe that doesn't work with sharing the slide. So if you try sharing the screen, that
yes,
might work.
yes, let's do that. Just a second, I will switch it. We can salvage this. Okay, let me just quickly get to that slide, and like this, and just a second. Oh, we have to switch it. We can go here. So how about now?
Yeah, that works now.
Okay, perfect. So I'm very happy that we managed to solve this. So as you can see, this is like some example code taken actually from the official blog post for the release of Angular 14. As you can see here, we are creating like a form group, and inside of it some other form groups and form controls. Personally, in practice, I usually like to use form builder to define the reactive form, but that's like as an example, that's all right. And here we can see we define this reactive form, and then we try to access some stuff, or here we call the patch value. And basically this patch value already gets a code completion because it knows what kind of properties are defined in that form group. So this would not have worked previously. It would not know there is address or there is a street and that the street has a name. We would need to do it ourselves, and we could easily make a typo and the compiler would not help us, and it would compile and we would deploy it and we would get the runtime errors or like weird behaviors in runtime. But now, because it is fully typed, the compiler will catch this either in the editor or at least in the build process. So that way we can be sure that no such bugs like slip into the production, which is really amazing. So, and as you can see, this is like this standard interface or like a class as we used in the past. So it's the form group, form control. So this is nothing special. And therefore, we are going to see how it happens during the migration. So let's say we have this simple component which has, in the constructor, we are injecting the form builder. And that's like the way I prefer to do it personally. So, and then form builder can define a form group with two properties. So it's a very simple form with username and email, right? And we usually store this form in some reference, so that way we can pass it into the template and stuff like that. And let's just say we want to patch some value into that form. And previously in Angular 13, if we did something like this, like we would try to patch a property which we just call here wrong, no such property exists on a form, this would work. Like it would not fail and we would patch a property which is not used, right? So this is not so nice. Now, if we run ng update, what happens is that the automatic schematics will migrate to this untype. So that way you get backwards compatibility. So you don't get, your application will not be broken, by this automatic migration. And if you had it correctly, you can basically just do search and replace on your whole project and remove that untyped prefix, and that way you enable the type checking, right? So if you end up like this with the untyped, this will still compile correctly. You will not break your application. You can go to production, but then slowly, either step by step, if you have a lot of like type errors, or if you don't have, then in also only in one go, you can just do search and replace, remove all of this, and then this will become an error. So this is this next step where we already removed that prefix, so we don't have the untyped for builder, because we run, for example, the search and replace on our whole code base and remove that prefix. So we have again the normal interfaces and classes. This activates this type checking, and now we are going to see that we are going to get an TypeScript compiler error in our editor, or at least in our build process, which will say that we are trying to put a value to the property wrong, but such property doesn't exist on a type of that form which was defined here. So this is pretty amazing. So I just import back to use the typed interfaces, which are basically the interfaces which we used whole time from version 2 to 13. So we just remove that untyped prefix, and then we get the type safety unlocked. All right. So as we have seen, the migration is fully backwards compatible because of those untyped interfaces. So you are guaranteed that your application will compile and can be deployed. And then you can basically incrementally migrate back to original interfaces. So that can be form group, form builder, from untyped form group, untyped from form builder. And yeah, you can either do it incrementally or in one go, depending on the state of your code base. So you can migrate in your own pace and find errors lurking in your code base. All right. So this is the forms. I think that's one of the most important one, which can make the largest difference in terms of like when developing this kind of feature for the developer experience, so you can develop it much faster, and also in terms of robustness for the application, for the users, that there will be less bugs. Another cool feature coming in Angular 14 is native custom page title. So what do we mean? It's a native support for setting page title, so we do not do some extra custom steps which were necessary in the past to achieve the same behavior. Even previously, we could write something around it with the help of title service, but we would have to store the title or the translation key for the title in like some unstructured data on the route or some other place. So now this leads to more streamlined and standardized usage for this use case, which will then become standardized between multiple Angular projects over time, which is pretty beneficial, especially in larger enterprise environments with many applications and many teams. So, and it is still possible to define more complex behavior with the use of custom title strategy. So how did this work in the past was that when we defined the route configs, so for the routes, can be like normal eagerly loaded route or even like lazy loaded route, doesn't really matter. We usually needed to specify either the direct title or a translation key for a title in this generic data object for the route, and then we would need to implement some custom service which would start this processing, where it would listen to the navigation end event, and it would pick the data from the currently activated route, and then it would set it to a browser title with the help of the provided title service. So this was quite custom, so everybody would do it slightly differently. So now with Angular 14, first of all, the route config gets like a native support for the title property, which will be automatically reflected into the browser title. So we do not need to write this kind of processing, which is pretty cool. So it's much like you can save yourself like 3 or 4 steps to achieve the same behavior. And if you do not need translations, then your job is basically done. So this is very nice. But of course, if you want to do like a more complex behavior. So for example, you need to translate your titles during runtime because you use something like ngx translate, then you can still define your own custom title strategy, which extends the title strategy. And then that interface forces you to implement this update title method, where you can use the provided helper, which comes from that base class, which helps you to extract that title which was specified here. And in that case, it would not be home, but something like page.home or like some kind of a translation key. And then you can use some of your translation service to translate it and set the title, which would then reflect the currently selected language. So that would be something very nice. And as you can see, then usually in the core or app module, we would register this custom title strategy as a title strategy. So this is something which we do with interceptors or like a global error handler, where we can provide our own implementation. So this behaves exactly in the same way. So it's a very cool improvement, which again, like goes in that way that Angular is very opinionated, which is great because then every project looks the same. So it's much easier to orient yourself when you are switching from project to project from the first moment. So this is pretty cool. And if you look at this code example, do you see here something like unusual, which is not so like it was not really possible to do in Angular before version 14, something which stands out?
Is it the inject function?
Exactly. So usually if you think about it, whenever we wanted to do like some kind of injection Angular, we would have to do the constructor injection, right? But here we don't have a constructor, and we inject this native Angular title service with the new inject function. So let's speak a little bit about that. So in Angular version 14, we have a new way of doing Angular dependency injection. So it actually started as a bug fix which exposed internal inject function, which have been there for a quite some long time from what I've understood. So it was always there, but it was not exported, so we could not use it. And now it was exported, so we can import it and start using it. So, and it turns out, like based on the feedback on the social media and other channels, that people really like it and started implementing many cool things with this inject function. It has a potential to reduce boilerplate of many popular third-party libraries like NGRX, for example. And it works exactly the same as original dependency injection, which is pretty important, that we do not really need to like relearn a new way of doing things, so there is no clash in that. And I would say subjectively that there is no need to start reworking your code bases to throw away the constructor injection and start using the inject function. There is no value in that, like in your application code, but the main value will hopefully come from the popular third-party libraries, which will be able to reduce that boilerplate even further, which we will see like a possible example very soon. And the main gotcha is that it must run in the injection context or construction time, which is kind of the same thing. And we will illustrate that in the code example now. So first of all, let's see up here. So this is like a hypothetical select function, which may or may not be added to NGRX. I hope it will. So what is happening here? We define just like a standalone JavaScript function or TypeScript function, right, called select. And now we see that this function basically will retrieve the selector, and then it calls inject to retrieve the NGRX store, and then it returns store.select selector. Now, if we define something like this in our core module, for example, as a utility function, or even better, if something like this would land in NGRX, it would allow us in our component, if we have some container component and we want to select something, we can just say select and pass him some selector. So in this specific case, it's called like some feature view from NGRX, right? So we created a selector and we pass it here. And that's all we need to do. That would be actually enough. We do not need any constructor. We do not need to inject the store. We do not need to import the store interface. We do not need to do this store.select selector. Only this would be enough. And this would also work because the property assignment on the class level actually is the same as calling inside of the constructor, which means is in constructor time, so this will work. So here is just for the illustration. If we call it the property assignment on the class level, that's the constructor time, it works. Then of course, if we did it in the constructor, it would also work because constructor runs in the constructor time. And those two are actually completely the same. Because behind the scenes, when it runs, it happens, these kind of things are like inline in a constructor actually, like when it's compiled. So those two are exactly the same. But another very common use case is that if we have a component, sometimes we receive some kind of parameter through the input, so like some kind of ID, for example. And then we sometimes want to parameterize our selector. And this would not work. So first of all, we would need to do it in ng init and not in constructor, because the value of the inputs is not yet defined at the constructor time, but only after first ng changes, which then run ng init. So that's how it works in Angular. So this is not a constructor time, this is runtime. So there, this function would fail. So that's just like an illustration of that it would not work under every circumstance. But for those base use cases, it would be really amazing if the third-party libraries provided something like this, or you can write this kind of utility for yourself. All right. So yeah, and just to summarize, like probably it's not the best idea to start rewriting all your constructor injections in such form for like a basic injection of your services inside of your application, because it doesn't really bring anything. But maybe you can either introduce yourself like this kind of utility which can reduce the boilerplate, or hopefully it will come from third-party libraries. Like for me, the obvious example, NGRX, but I can very well imagine that other libraries could benefit from something as well. All right. So then we have another one, which is protected properties. This is also very, very useful, especially in a context when you are developing a custom component library for your organization. So something like an Angular material, but your own custom one for your own organization to implement like the patterns and the designs. So what is it all about? So this makes the biggest impact when implementing components, because previously components, to be able to access data from the component in the component template, or the methods of the component in the component template, they would need to have a public access modifier. And in TypeScript works like this, that if you do not write anything, it means it's public. So the public is the default access modifier. But if you made it private, then you could not use it in a template. So this led to a bad situation where if you're writing this kind of reusable component, you need to make stuff public to be able to use it in the components template. But sometimes then the consumer of that component in the application would get the reference to that component using a view child or view children, if it's more than one. And then they would be able to access all those public methods and properties and override the values, even if they were not meant to do that, because it was like the interface was not meant for those consumers of those components. So this is now solved because we can now access methods and properties of a component class which were marked as protected in a template. And that way we can differentiate what is really public. If we have, for example, some custom overlay or popover component and we want to allow the consumers to open it programmatically, we can introduce a public method called open, close, or toggle, right? And this will be like the public interface of that component. But we then might need some other properties and some state which we need to use in the template, and then we can mark those with protected, so then the consumer will not see them and not be able to change them, which is great. So it gives us the possibility to distinguish between the template use and the public API of a component. For services, it doesn't really make difference because we could just mark stuff as private. So this is very nice. So how does it look like? Let's say we have a popover, and in the past, and let's just say like we have a popover, a very simplified version, and then in the template we use this isOpen property to determine if it should be rendered or not, right? And in the past, this will have to be public. So there would be no keyword or public, but usually the code style was that people do not write anything, so it would be nothing. And then it would be public, so the same as this method, so that we can use in a template. But then in the version 13, if somebody would get a reference to that component from their template using the view child and start writing this code, they would see the toggle, and they would also see the is open before, right? Because it could not have been protected. But now in version 14, when we make it protected, it can be used in a template, but the consumers are not going to see it. So it would not be tempting to use this unofficial API of those components, which makes it for much cleaner implementation. And again, less possibilities to introduce bugs and errors at the runtime. So this is pretty amazing. Again, mostly in a situation when you work for a big organization and you need to write custom component library. And I can very well imagine that also the open source third-party component libraries like Angular Material or ng Zoro or Undesign or PrimeNG might very well migrate to using protected keyword for all the stuff which was never meant to be public. So this is a great improvement for the robustness of those code bases. All right. So now other features, we will just quickly go through a list because they are not as important or not as impactful. So there have been improvements to the language service, which is the thing which runs usually in your editor like VS Code or IntelliJ WebStorm or IDEA, which gives you a hints in the template. So for example, it will now correctly catch if you do the banana in the box two-way binding the other way around as it should be, or if you do like this, how is it called now? Like the optional chaining. I forgot. If you use it incorrectly with if you use it in a place where it anyway doesn't make sense from the type point of view. So that's a nice little improvement. Now, ng module for the template-driven forms, if somebody uses it, will now work properly in a components which use on-push change detection strategy. So this was actually not really working well for a long time. I didn't even know about it because I always used the reactive forms, but for the people who really like to use it, now it will work with the better performance in those on-push components. So I think that's really great. Now, Angular CLI improvements, those are big. You can enable ng completion if you use Angular CLI in your terminal, and it will basically give you code completion for the commands like generate or test or whatever, including its options. So like, for example, stats JSONs or source maps, so you don't have to check the documentation, but you will get the support directly in the terminal. So I think that's pretty amazing. And more important, ng cache now allows you to control the new caching behavior of the Angular CLI. So you can clean it or you can disable it, which is very, very important. So again, mostly in the context of like larger enterprise organization where you have like many applications and libraries, it is pretty common that you want to debug like library from your organization inside of the project by just tweaking it in node modules, either directly or with npm link. And this did not work from like version 12 to 14 basically, because when they introduced Angular cache, those changes were not picked up and you had to manually delete .angular cache folder. So this made that debugging sessions like more annoying because after every change you had to delete the cache manually. So now it is possible just to disable cache for such a session, and it will behave as in past. So whenever you make a change to that code in node modules of that specific library which you try to debug, it will automatically reflect itself in a running local application, which is amazing. And the Angular DevTools are now available in Firefox. So Angular team released a very cool extension which is there in the DevTools in Chrome, which lets you to explore like the component tree and what's the actual state of the component. And now this is also available in Firefox. So if you use that browser, you are covered, which is again pretty great. Now, another improvement which will make every single application at least a little bit faster is that the error messages have been refactored to only use error code for production instead of the whole message. So that means the build process now can tree check quite some strings when doing the production build, which describe those errors. But don't worry, even for like a production build application which runs in a browser, if you see that error, it will have a unique error code, which is then very easy to Google to get the support and what the actual message was. So it will have like a NG0053 or something like that, and then you can Google it. And I think that the most common ones actually got a YouTube explainer, which is then linked on the official Google website, which is even cooler because it will go through like the most common causes and how to fix them. And then we have the ability to provide injector for embedded views. So that's like a DI context when we lazy load components. But yeah, if you didn't lazy load components, this didn't really, make a difference. But yeah, if you lazy load some very heavy components, so not on the route level, but on the component level, now you can specify injector and provide specific services for that lazy loaded component. Then there are new CDK primitives for menu and dialog, headless, so you can use them to create your own. So they basically join the ranks of other things like overlays or portals. So like more primitives to like make your life easier when you need to implement your own custom component library, which you get these high quality primitives. And then there are new harness methods, which are like more type safe for the null. So you can check if there is a harness or get harness all null instead of just throwing an error. And experimental support for ES build. So that's like a builder you can enable in your Angular JSON, but it's not yet fully feature complete. So it will not work for like the serious projects which use most features, but it's a work in progress. And the promise is that it will deliver much faster build times in the future. So let's hope. So did we forget something really big? Anybody has an idea before we wrap things up? Could we forget some topic which was new in Angular 14?
Somebody here said standalone.
That's exactly correct. Perfect. So we didn't forget. We just wanted to make a teaser. So let's speak a little bit about the standalone components, or in other words, optional ng modules, which was only in dev preview in version 14. So that's something to like point out. And maybe we'll hear something else later today, but in the version, it was just developer preview. So like before we start, just like a small remark, this is like a huge topic in itself. So we will just do like a very lightning speed overview, and then maybe we'll hear more about it later, but just to have an idea. So don't worry, this is not a new huge breaking change in Angular which will mandate that you have to rewrite all your application. The AngularJS is not happening all over again, luckily, but it's a new way to be able to basically compose your application without the module. So application can be bootstrapped without the application module, just using bootstrap application component. And it will provide definitely improvement for people who have been using SCAM pattern, which is a funny acronym, but it means single component Angular module pattern, where for every component in their application, they define a module so they could compose them on that very granular level of a single component. So for them, it will represent much less boilerplate. But as far as I understand, like the main goal of this is to make learning Angular easier by postponing the need to learn advanced concepts like template, context, and injector hierarchy, which are mostly managed by the modules. And those are not actually going away. It's just a new way to achieve exactly the same things. So yeah. It's alternative syntax to define the template context and injector hierarchy. So before, what does that mean? So before, when you had a component and you wanted to use another component in the template of that component, or a directive or a pipe, they all had to be available within like a single template context, which was defined on a module. So then the module had the declarations array, and in the declarations array, we had that component. And then maybe module imported another module, which exported another component, which was in its declarations. So they ended up in the same template context, so they could use each other in each other's template. Same for directives, same for pipes. So now this can be defined without the module, because now it will be possible to specify imports array directly on the component. So that's like the main difference. But actually, it doesn't work differently. It's exactly the same. So the new standalone components manage the template context by taking over the responsibilities of declarations and imports array from ng module. And the providers can now be scoped to lazy loaded route on the route itself instead on the lazy loaded module. So that was also in the past. It's like a best practice to split application into multiple independent and isolated lazy features, which then entry point is the lazy loaded module, which is the ng module. And then when we had a service which should be only available within that feature, so that we have a nice encapsulation and isolation, we would, instead of doing provided in root, we would put in the providers of that lazy loaded ng module. And now, because there is no module, we can define providers on that lazy loaded route itself. So again, it's the exactly same thing, just defined in a slightly different place. And this will allow us to skip that module file. So that's like a very lightning intro. Now, one cool thing is that the smallest possible Angular hello world just got even smaller. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is like the smallest possible Angular hello world. So, how many lines do we have? 1, 2, and it's like 5, 7, 8 lines of code. And this is an actual working Angular application. That's all you need. You don't even have to specify the selector, because then you can just specify the default one, which are going to be ng component. I actually tried it locally and it works. So this is definitely cool for like getting started tutorials for new people who are trying to get into Angular development. So that's definitely something very nice. All right. And here we see a more complex example. So we have this standalone true flag, which marks this component as standalone. And as we said, now instead of the module, the component is managing its own template context. So what does that mean? In its template, we want to use the material card component. So that means we have to import material card module, which exports the material card component, which also has it in its declarations. Same for ngIf with the common module. Same for like a local highlight directive and stuff like that, which could be also standalone. So it can be mixed and matched. So again, like it works exactly the same. It's just defined in a different place. And there might be, of course, some like advanced improvements in the future, but currently it mostly works exactly the same. And then we said like we can also specify the provider. So in this case, it's like a value, but this could have been service or some config or anything else. Instead of on the module to scope it, we can provide it on the route instead. So if this would have been a lazy loaded route, then those providers would be only available within the context of the route. So that makes it nice and isolated, which keeps the architecture clean. All right. So optional ng modules and standalone components definitely great for learning, flattening down that Angular learning curve for the beginners. Amazing. Great for small projects. Over time, possibly better developer experience for enterprise. Great projects is just another way of doing the same with some additional benefits. I was talking to like Alex from Angular team, who showed me like some very in-depth scenario where it would catch some errors which would have been easier to miss with the modules, for example, but I don't have time to show it. And basically, those underlying concepts of template context and injector hierarchy are here to stay. They did not change at all in the way how they work. They are just specified in using different same syntax, just in a different place. All right, so that was it. So we are also planning a lot of content about all these cool new things and features in Angular. So then it would make sense if you subscribe to our blog. Again, the link will be shared later. It's angularexperts.io/blog. There is a little form where you can provide your email, and that way you will get notified whenever there was a new blog post, so you can learn some cool new stuff about Angular. And yeah, what is your favorite feature from the Angular 14 features? Standalone components, inject, or the typed reactive forms? I'm curious.
Wow, there's a
How
lot.
does it look like?
There's a
Everything.
lot. Yeah, all of them. For me personally, it's probably the type reactive forms. Nobody else in the
Sounds
audience
good.
here?
An enterprise level.
Sorry?
From an enterprise level, definitely
Yeah.
the typed forms. Because I mean, it's
Yeah.
going to standardize the way that we do things, and I don't think I've ever built an application where we don't have forms. And with that, you get
Exactly.
a lot of complexity, a lot of errors might crop up, so that's going to reduce that. But I love the idea of the standalone components because I teach Angular, well, I teach JavaScript, and normally I shy away from Angular for the very reasons that there's too much of a hurdle sometimes. So in having this now, I can just stick to using Angular and not have to move to React or Vue. So
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds very good. Yeah. I see it basically exactly the same. So I'm looking forward to that future. Maybe one small thing we can say to that is like the biggest difference will be when they switch like the defaults of the schematics to use standalone, because personally I do not write this code by myself. I have like a keyboard shortcut in my editor where I just run schematics on my current folder and I just provide the component name, right? And then I get the component with the template, with the styles, with test stop. Same like for the lazy loaded feature and all this kind of stuff. You just get it like with a single command. So this is like one of the huge benefits of Angular, that we do not have to write this. And like once they switch the schematics default to standalone, then I will just go with what the default is, as I always do. But yeah, cool. All right.
A
So
quick question
before,
about
yeah,
standalone components, if I may. Great
yes, please.
presentation, thanks. So if I mark
Thank
a
you.
component as standalone, does it itself still need to be declared in a module?
No, not anymore.
Nice, great.
So
Cheers,
it's
thanks.
like the way it was described by Igor Minar, like of Angular team. Now he moved on, but he was there for a very long time. Was is it as if there was like a virtual module in the background. So that's why this component doesn't need to be like declared anywhere, and that's why this component can like import other modules. So, but if you think about it like this concept of the template context explains that. So previously it was like the module which could manage the template context, and now the component can manage its own template context. So, and then if it's standalone and you want to use it like in your application, which is module based, you basically can import it in a module, like the way you would import any other module. And that way it's part of that module. So you can start using in the templates of the components which belong to that module. So I hope this answers your question. Cool.
Yep. Shall we go to questions? We have a question online as well. I can
Sure,
bring that
let's
on the
go
screen.
like through it and then we wrap it up. Sounds good.
So I have Steve here, and he's asking, can the browser tab title and or the favicon be changed dynamically while on a particular route, not just on URL change?
Yes. So like this behavior which was now added in Angular 14 makes it on the route change. In the past, we also usually written our own custom processing to do it on a route change. But the thing is actually that Angular always provided us with the title service, which allows us to update the title and we can call it at any time. So it was always possible to override title anytime we wanted. We were always in full control. And now what was added is just like a convenience for this most typical use case, that we do not have to build this own custom processing around it, but it just works out of the box.
Cool. Thank you very much, Steve, for your question.
Sorry, I didn't get it. Is there other question?
No, it was just this one online. Any
All
other
right.
questions here?
What's the treatment on if you want to lazy load components now if they don't come from a module?
So what's the
Standalone.
difference like lazy load the module and standalone component?
Yeah.
So not much. So previously it would have been like that we have a load children where we provide a module, and that module usually would have its own routing module where it would have the empty route which would match immediately, like empty string route, and that would bring that first container component of that lazy route. That would be like a standard. That would be also something which we get when we use like schematics to generate a new module with the route property and a parent module. And now the way it can be done is that you can do load children, and you can, instead of module, you can provide a standalone component, which would represent like the root component of that feature. And then you have two options, and it depends on what kind of behavior you want to achieve for the services. If you want to scope it to that feature, you can provide those services in a provider array of that root standalone component, which will be lazy loaded as a lazy loaded feature. And then if the component is destroyed, those services will be also destroyed. Or you can provide it in the provider's array on that route. And I think in that case, once you navigate there like the first time, then the services will stay alive for the whole lifetime of application, which would be exactly how it was previously with the original behavior with the modules.
Cool.
So
Thank you.
it's possible to achieve exactly the same behavior, and it's also possible now to get like a bit more control. But then again, actually, no, you could have done it in the past. You could have lazy loaded your module, and instead of providing those services on the module, you could provide them on that root component, which was then routed in that lazy component, lazy loaded module with its own routing module. So you can achieve all those use cases using the ng modules and using the standalone components. You will get exactly the same behaviors. It was always all possible.
Okay, cool. I mean, that's good because I thought there might have been a few extra steps to be able to achieve the same thing, but that's good.
No, it's basically just you remove this one file and you move those configs which were relevant, part of it to a component and part of it to a route. So it's actually not such a big deal.
Cool.
All right, thank you very much.
Perfect. So then we wrap it up, I guess. So thank you very much for your attention and for your questions. Like one thing before I leave, if you are working in a huge enterprise environment with many repos, like a polyrepo environment with many projects and applications, then you might be interested in Omniboard, which is a tool which helps you manage this kind of environments, which I created based on my experience from those environments. So basically, it allows you to define ad hoc checks based on like regex, xpath, and JSON path. You can then run them on the repos during the build time and upload like small metadata describing the results. And then you can feed those metadata in various ad hoc widgets, which you can then put together to create dashboards to track your environments, track your migration progress, best practices, and stuff like that. So you can check it out at omniboard.dev. You can get started for free. You can track as many projects as you want, and you can create like one dashboard, and I think you can do like 5 checks. So if you are working in a large environment with many projects, you can definitely benefit from this kind of overview that will allow you to perform like migrations across all those projects and stuff like that, and manage like the life cycle. Pretty cool stuff. So check it out. And the AngularExperts, of course, for the blogs and other offers of the workshops and consulting services and tooling for monorepos and starter templates and custom custom icon libraries and all this kind of stuff. So feel free to check it out. So yeah, thank you very much for your attention. It was great to be here with you tonight, and I hope you enjoyed the content, and I hope to see you someday in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're gonna give you a round of applause here. I'm not sure if you can hear it.
I can hear it. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed
Great
that.
presentation.
Thank you very much. Oh, right.
Cool.
Right.
So now, we're gonna have a sort of a quick, not break, but before I go on with Angular 15, I'm just gonna say something about the upcoming events here in UK and not only. So I'll share my screen. So First one, it's the Angular Architect today's workshop, which is gonna happen in London on 15th and 16th of November. And I will let Oye to tell you more about that one.
Okay. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Hello, everyone, again. I'd like to say a big thank you to Tomas for that very good talk. That's very insightful. Thank you very much. And good evening to everyone over there. So basically, I'm here to just promote the Angular Architects to Team Lead training that's taking place in London next month on the 15th and the 16th of November at the Modern Frontend Live event. So basically, this workshop is a combination of training content and roundtable discussions designed for senior devs and team leads who would like to be more confident about Angular architecture. It will basically be hosted by Bonnie Brennan. I don't know if you know Bonnie Brennan, but she's an Angular GDU, very popular in the community, and she's the one who will be taking this training and leading us in this training. Basically, some of the topics we'll be talking about are and are not limited to Angular style and structure, performance optimization, design patterns, and state management. We'll also be talking about monorepos and full stack development in Angular, and we'll be talking about DOM manipulations. Basically, it's more going to be like a roundtable sort of discussion where we'll be having feedback, talking about various use cases based on whatever is going on at the various companies of the members of the training and how to mitigate strategies that could be used to mitigate all these problems. So yeah, that's basically it. And I think Alex, there's a discount code. I think when you shared with
Yes, we
you,
do have a
maybe
discount code. Yeah.
yes,
So we
there's
have
a
a
discount code.
20%
So
off.
discount on off. Yeah. So I hope to see everyone there. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. So I highly recommend it. Bonnie is awesome. And if you do want to do probably, I don't know, 6 or 10 months, 12 months worth of Angular knowledge in 2 days, probably that's the
Yeah.
place to go. Highly recommend it.
Yeah. I'm also
Cool.
an alumni from the training, so I can definitely vouch for it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oye is also very active on the Angular Nation, which is a community website where there's all sorts of Angular developers with all sorts of levels. So if you want to join there, you're gonna have support, from
Yeah.
lots of Angular experts. There's jobs fairs going on, mentoring, events across different parts of the world, not so everywhere in America and Asia as well. And we have loads of people from Google talking regularly there as well, which is quite cool because we get the new stuff probably before anybody else. So it's quite cool.
Yeah.
Another one where we can see Oye in person and me there is gonna be on 16th of November. We're gonna have the Angular London meetup. So which is in the same time with the modern frontend. No, it is sharing. Is it not?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah. So basically, it's the workshop is taking place on the 15th and the 16th, but there's a conference on the 17th
Okay.
and the 18th of November.
Okay. Yeah. So if you are around London, yeah, join us there. Um, and what's next? Also have in Jerome. Right. Okay. So we have in Jerome in December, on the 2nd of December. And we have a 15% off as well for the Angular Birmingham community. So if you want to go there, there's like 15% off on all the tickets. You have to use this code. If you scan the QR code, it will get you there straight away. Let me see. Oh yes, sorry. So I think I forgot to click on the button. So quickly again to share the screen. So going back to the Angular Architects 2 days workshop. So it's gonna be on 15th and 16th of November. So you can see it here. Thank you very much for pointing that out. So it has more than front-end live, which is gonna be 2 days of conference and 2 days of workshops. again, if you have time, go there. It's awesome. It's gonna be in London. Then Angular London on the 16th of November, where Roy is gonna come there in person as well, and me, and possibly other people as well from Angular core team. From Angular core team. And then for NG Rome, yeah, which is on the 2nd of December, we have 15% off on all the tickets if you use this code Angular Birmingham 22, and or if you scan the QR code, it's gonna get you straight there with the code applied already. Then coming up in Birmingham, we have the Manage Ops meetup, which is gonna be on 25th of October. The Joint Works, and then the Fusion, which is on 8th of December. It is a placeholder date from what I know so far, so I'm not sure if it's gonna be on 8th, but it's probably gonna be at some time in December. So hold those dates. Cool. So now we'll look into what's new in Angular 15. It's gonna be, I'll try to go quickly through it because we know we've been already for an hour. So when the last time I did a talk on what was new on Angular, it was on Angular 9, and I had the same tag, smaller, faster, and simpler. And a few versions later, it's still the same thing. The focus is still on getting it faster, it's still on getting it smaller, and still on getting it simpler to use. So it's great to see that Angular team is actually working towards this and achieving these goals. So what we're gonna cover today quickly is gonna be the directive composition API, which is probably one of my preferred new and coming up features. Then standalone components, we're not gonna cover it again, but I'm just gonna mention that from V15 it's actually stable, so you can use it in production. Then we're gonna have MDC web, which is used by the material components. So we're gonna touch up on that one. The new image directive, improved stack traces. We're gonna have to write less code now when we do lazy loading on a route, and they're gonna see some deprecations and other removals. So first, regarding the language service, there's some cool new features. So Dylan from the Angular core team, the language service will be able to automatically suggest imports for selectors. So I'll go quickly to actually see it in action here. So you see here, when you have the HTML, your standalone component, and the template, it's gonna give you the way to import it straight from here, which before wasn't working. So that's a really cool addition to save some time. Next one. Next one, the improved stack traces. So Minko had this tweet. I've got the link here. There's some interesting discussions around it. But basically, it's gonna be relevant. It's gonna be linked, and it's gonna be friendlier. So you can. It's gonna make more sense when you actually read those errors. So you can see exactly on how it happened, from which component to which action was triggering it. So it's gonna be comparing to this one. Yeah, it's gonna be much easier to understand where the error was coming from. And next is the lazy loading. So before, when you import a component, you would have to do the then and then select the customer modules. But now in V15, you don't have to do the .then anymore, because it selects the default exported class by and it uses that automatically. So again, it's gonna save a little bit more time. Again, it's faster, quicker to write, and easier to understand. And then you have the image directive. So it's in dev preview in 14.2, but it's gonna be stable in V15. So I've got these links here, which I highly recommend to go and read. the whole idea is to enhance the web page speed and to make it more performance, especially when you have a lot of images on the page. Normally, you know, when you go and you have, I don't know, let's say 10, 15 images, even though they're not displayed for the user, those images will still load, even though they're not visible on the actual screen because they're at the bottom of the page, let's say. And this one gives you loads of options to select, you know, to set them as lazy. There's an option where you can set it as lazy, so those images are not going to be loaded until they become closer to being displayed on the screen on the viewport. If you have an image which you want it to have a priority to load that all the time, and first you can set it to eager, and that's working with because of the new browsers APIs. So there's some default in the browsers capabilities, but Angular expands on that and it makes it much easier for devs to work with it. So I think I've got a quick example here, which I got it from this YouTube JS frameworks, which I recommend watching because it explains all of them in much detail. But basically what you need to do, you have to use this ng source. So that's the way you use this directive, which needs to be imported first of all. So it's called ng optimized image. So you have to specify a width and the height. This one, for example, the first one, because it's the first image on the page, is set to have the priority high. So if you look, for example, if you look in the in Chrome, let's see if it works here. If I go to the network tab and we look at the images, clear all that, images. Let's save this. So you can see here that it only loaded these two pictures, even though we have more pictures on the page. So as I scroll down, it loads the next one, and then the next one, and then the London one, which is quite cool, because why waste a lot of bandwidth and, you know, consume a lot of browser resources for things that you actually don't need to have it on the screen. I think this is quite a nice addition. And again, it's stable in v15. So there's a lot to it. You can specify even different widths, so we can load different images. Something like this. You can say, you know, when it's this size, load this image. When it's a bigger size, so it's gonna load those image. That's how you set it to lazy loading. And also, if you're using a CDN, you can give it a provider, and it would load the images using that CDN. So in I'm not sure if it's this in the example, but yeah, I think it's here. So here you can have a provider, and then based on whatever your cloud provider, then you work with it to fetch your images from there. So again, if you watch these articles, they're quite good. Okay. Another I'll say, I don't know, big one is the MDC Web. So basically, what MDC Web is, if you haven't heard of it before, it's a library created by the Google material design team, and basically the material design applies to the mobile apps, to Android as well, and kind of all the Google projects. And it provides so MDC Web, it provides reusable primitives for building material design components. Before, it was not using this directly, so this is its own library, so you can go there and use this and build your own components if you want to play in JavaScript. But then now Angular Material imports those primitives directly into the Angular Material components, and whenever a new change comes up from the material design team, that would be much quicker now cascaded down into material components. There are also other issues. For example, some companies might use React and Angular in the same time. and if you use the material UI library for React, they are following the actual MDC web standards, where the previous let's say v14 and before Angular material components weren't using it. So although it was the same design system, they were looking a bit different, and the way you would modify them, or setting the font, they were named differently, the classes and so on. So now with this one, it's going to be all matching, which is quite good. There is a migration guide as well. Most of the times you won't see any differences. So if you run the migration, what would happen is you would change. So you can see here what are the changes, first of all, when you go to the documentation. So it's not released yet, but yeah, this is on the next. But yeah, there will be a migration, how's it called, script, and that would change all automatically. We'll try to do as much as possible. If you still want to use the old one, so they're not going to disappear, they'll still be there, but they would be called mat legacy button module instead of mat button module. And you have to import it from material legacy button. So they've done a lot of work. Probably most of the work in Angular material for v15 was around this, which is quite cool. But again, look at this one when you actually get to do it, because there might be some gotchas around there. Cool. Next. Yeah, this is the big one, which is probably one of my favorite features for Angular 15, which is directive composition API. Again, another requested feature since probably 2016 as well. Same when the type forms were requested as well. And Christian from the Angular core team, he finally got to do it. There's a very good video. So some of the material which you see here on screen is from him. He was on Angular Nation, I think around a month ago, talking about it. Again, highly recommend it. Go on YouTube and watch this. He explains in way more details what it's all about. But basically, it's gonna make it very easy to put common directive logic into one place, and then you can reuse that across multiple components without having to do the same thing over and over again and apply the same directives to the components over and over again. So for example, here, if you want to create a menu, so you have your component, and then you have these host directives. So basically, the directives that you have it in here in this array will automatically apply when you have the menu, the cool menu component in your HTML. So you can specify like this. If you do not want to expose, let's say, anything, you just add a directive like that, and then it would apply whatever that directive does to this component. So that means when you have your cool menu component, you don't have to add this directive manually on it, because it's going to be by default with this component. Or if you want to have a bit more control, you can have it in an object, and then you specify the directive name. In case we want CDK menu, and then you can select which inputs and outputs you want to expose from that directive. If you don't want to expose anything, you do basically this. But if you do want to expose some of the inputs and outputs of that directive, you can do it, and you can also rename it. So for example, here we are exposing the disabled input from the CDK menu, and we're going to call it CDK menu disabled. And then same for the outputs. Whenever the closed event is emitted, we're going to rename this CDK menu closed. So when you have this component, the user of this component can say CDK menu closed and listen to this output, and then whatever the CDK menu directive does, we would notify the listener of that component. And same for this one. If you want to pass in down the disabled, you can use the CDK menu disabled to pass down that input. Again, this is kind of hiding the API. So if you don't want them to use the same API, you can hide it, or you can just, if you just want to expose it as is, you can just leave it in as disabled and here as closed, and it would make it visible for the user of this component. I think it's quite cool, and it's mainly going to be used probably again for libraries because it's going to be much easier to create components. And that was a problem that they had with Angular material, because they had to keep extending, components and using inheritance, and yeah, it was a bit not easy to maintain. So this makes it much easier to group some functionality, and behaviors for a component. So this is another example. For example, here you have like math checkbox. So here, they can now use these directives. So they can put all these directives together, can color, can disable ripple, has tab index, and then they are exposing like the color inputs, the disabled input here for this one, the disable ripple and tab index. So it's very, very nice. And here is another example. Again, this is from that video, so I highly recommend you watching that video, because it gives a lot of inside details. But here, for example, we want to create our own menu. Let's say, so we're using the CDK tooltip. If we want to have a tooltip with a menu, let's say all the time, then we're using the CDK menu again, and we're exposing those the inputs and the outputs. And here we have this directive, for example, CDK tooltip, which basically has the mouse enter and the mouse leave events. So it's going to call these functions. So what happens then is these ones would get automatically applied to the host of the component. So this is going to get applied. This one is going to get applied automatically. So basically, this is the MAD menu. So this is how you would do it before. You would apply all this manual CDK tooltip, CDK menu. So wherever you are using a MAD menu, you'd have to kind of put this manually all the time. But then you don't have to do that anymore. So you can technically just use MAD menu, and automatically those will be there. Those directives will be applied automatically. So that's quite cool. So here's Christian from that video. So some of the features, so you can apply as many directives to a host as you want, which is quite cool. Inputs and outputs are hidden by default, and developer decides which ones will be exposed. It works automatically with the template type checking. It supports all the features of a directive, dependency injections, host binding, lifecycle hooks, and so on. Can be chained, so host directives of other host directives. So you can have multiple host directives and so on. You can have a tree of directives in the end applied to a component. One thing to be aware is you can't have the same directive applied twice to a component. So that's gonna probably come in the downsides. It will be picked by the view child and the content child queries. You can inject its own host directive, and the host executes after host directive to allow for overrides of the host bindings. So you can, create, for example, if you're using, let's say the tooltip, and you want to have a predefined message in there, you can override that and have it defined. So whenever it's by default, it's going to show that message. Some of the limitations: host directives have to be standalone. The host itself does not, so you can have it on a normal component. Directives can only match once per element. Yeah, so as I was saying before, you can have more than one. So yeah, that's what you kind of have to be careful if you use a directive in multiple other directives, for example, and then you combine those other directives into one directive or a component. Yeah, you have to make sure that they don't. You'll get the error message anyway. So yeah, I will let you know. Currently, there's no way to pass in generics to the host directives, and I think Christian is looking at a way of doing that. And then components cannot be used as host directives. And there's another interesting one from Netanel. So again, if you go to this Twitter account, there's another good conversation in there. But I actually have this example of, I've created this example in StackBlitz. I'll show that in a second. Yeah, let's go there. So here, if you don't follow him, I would recommend to follow him because he has some really nice articles and blog posts as well, and tweets. So we have a directive which is called if project active. Yeah, standalone. Then the host directives. This one is using ngif on it. And then the idea is that on a div or on whatever, you can say if project active in the template. So what this does, you can see here it injects the ngif, the ngif directive, and then it injects the project service directive. So if that project is active, then we will show this div. And then what it does here on ng on init, it calls that service, it subscribes to it, it gets the active observable, subscribes to it. So that would be an API request, maybe, I don't know. And then it sets the ngif to whatever that value is active, so true or false. So I've recreated this in StackBlitz. So if you want to play with it, it's all set already to Angular 15 next 6, and it's got Angular material in there as well. If you want to play with the Angular material stuff as well. So here we can see this one, which is if project active, and then if I go here and I change this to false, then it will disappear, of course. So let's have a quick look. So what is the directive? So I've set this directive in here in this in the app component to make it a bit easier. I don't get so many components. But basically, yeah, we got the directive standalone. We're declaring this directive ngif in here. Yeah, basically same thing as in the other one, and then in yeah, in the app HTML, it's gonna be like this. So it will open the possibility of doing loads of cool stuff, especially if, maybe again for library owners where you need loads of directives to combine for a specific components. It will make it much easier to compose behaviors together. And yes, you have to import it as well in your ng module, this directive. The next one, sorry. So the next one is we're gonna look at what's deprecated and other removals that are gonna happen. One thing which we were discussing here, but its protractor will go away slowly. So I think in v16 is not gonna be available anymore. So it's probably gonna be deprecated in v15, and then in v16 is gonna be removed. Some of the breaking changes. Angular no longer supports Node.js 14.15 between 15 and 19, and 16.10 to 12. So the current supported ones are 14.20, 16.13, and 18.10. TypeScript versions older than 4.8 are no longer supported. On the forms, the disable state will always be called when a control value accessor is attached. You can opt out from it. The relative link resolution is no longer configurable in the router. So this was removed, but it was, I think it was added. It was just added, yeah, because it was there was a bug fix, so it was a way to kind of go around that bug fix. Let's look through other stuff. There is other interesting. There's loads of them, but just some of the important ones. Yeah, the router is gonna be standalone as well. So that means that it can be tree shakeable. So if you don't need all the things of a router and only need some parts of it, it can be tree shakeable. So that's again saving some time with the build when it builds the app. Yes, there is another fix with a keyframe. So if you're using animation, if you had the same animation name applied on various components, they would kind of clash and override each other. So now they are scoped to the component. So using the component name, something like this, so they don't clash with each other anymore. Another one, which is, I don't know, probably a big one, which was introduced and now it's kind of removed, is whenever you had injectables, you had the option to do to have provide in and say where you want it to be provided in a specific module or not. So it looks like it's not used properly, and yeah, everybody just leaves it as is, which is provided in root. So I think this feature is gonna go away now. So you have to provide your services in your module as it was before in the providers. What else? What else? Yeah, this is the ng optimized image directive. I think that's it. So that's just a quick sort of overview. There's probably going to be more things to come. It's not listed. There might be another next coming in, maybe next 7, and then it's going to be the final release. It is supposed to be released in that week of November with the 16th of November. So probably we'll hear from the Angular core team at that event, the front-end live. They're going to be there presenting. So probably they will announce it at that point. But that was all from me. Thank you very much. Yes, any questions, any other features that you know about it and I'm not aware of? One second, because they can't hear you.
Yeah, so going back to overloading directives, is there a way to sort of do a bit of pre-processing before it and then call the original direct? So let's say you expose a directive from something else. Is there a way of actually doing something before you call the parent directive? Let's call it so.
Yes. So yes, yeah, you can do that. So you can have those configurations before it's so you can have like default configurations if you want. So you know if you want to change the setup of how the tooltip looks like, or you can do that yeah beforehand. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions? Thomas, Oye, do you have any new insights into the Angular 15?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that directive composition to play around with that and see if, like, especially for that use case of like this enterprise component library, if we can simplify there something, because we managed to get away without using like a inheritance as they do in Angular material, but maybe we can like streamline our composition even more. So I'm really looking forward to play with that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. That's the main one for me.
So I think for me,
Sorry, say again,
the
Oye.
image optimization for me is probably. I said the image optimization is you have to rely on external library. Or now that it's coming into Angular directly, then that makes it a lot easier.
There's something wrong with your sound. I'm not sure if it's only me. Yeah, it's the sound. I'm not sure if it's only me.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, the image directive is quite cool as well. And the nice errors, you know, when you know get errors is actually easy to see where they're coming from, much easier. Let's see if there's any questions in the chat. Nope, it looks like no questions in the chat. So I think that's it. Thank you very much, Thomas. Unless you want to add anything else, Thomas, Oye, then we're gonna wrap it up.
Thank you very much for having me. It was nice to be tonight with you. I also learned something new about like Angular 15, and until next time, have a great time and always bet on Angular.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks for accepting our invite, Thomas and Oye. Have a great evening, and we'll catch up with you next time. Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Ciao. See you.
Ciao. See you.